In France, the housing crisis can ask you for something before it gives you a key. Not money first. A person. A guarantor. Because in parts of France, it does not matter how responsible you are. It does not matter how careful you live. If your dossier is not perfect, if you do not have the right contract, the right papers, the right backup person, you can be rejected before you even step inside the building. That is France's signature pain. You are not just looking for a home. You are trying to qualify as a safe file. And when housing becomes a file, life becomes a test. The country can look calm from the outside. Beautiful streets, old buildings, cafes, normal life. But renters know a different France. The France where the search is quiet and exhausting. The France where you refresh listings and send messages and hear nothing. The France where you line up for a viewing and realize it is not a viewing, it is selection. A hallway full of people holding the same thing. The dossier, ID, payslips, bank statements, a work contract, and the unspoken requirement locals understand instantly, a stable contract, CDI. Because in tight markets, stability becomes a weapon, and the people without perfect stability get filtered out. So you start building your dossier like armor. You remove anything that could look risky. You explain everything. You try to look quiet. You try to look easy. Because the safest file wins. And even if you do everything right, you can still lose. Because a file does not show your exhaustion. A file does not show your honesty. A file does not show how hard you are trying. A file only shows what makes you easy to accept. That is why the rejection feels so humiliating. It is not always a message that says no. It is silence. No reply, no callback, nothing. And you know exactly why. Your dossier did not make the cut. So people adapt. They stop asking questions. They stop negotiating. They stop complaining about problems in the apartment. Because when there are 10 people behind you, your home starts to feel replaceable. And once you feel replaceable, you start living smaller. In France, small space living is not always a lifestyle trend. For many renters, it becomes compression. A loft bed is not cute. It is what happens when adult life is forced into one room. A wall desk is not minimalism. It is the last surface left where your life can function without sitting on your bed. Storage walls are not design. They are evidence. Evidence that the space cannot hold a normal life, so your life must fold. These are not solutions. They are coping. Because the alternative is not better. The alternative is losing the address. And then France adds another layer that makes the pressure feel even tighter. The waiting, because the private market is not the only line. France has social housing, HLM, that millions of households rely on, and millions are also waiting. In official discussions, the number of households waiting for social housing is counted in the millions. That means the crisis is not only happening in one city, it is running through the entire system. And when you cannot access HLM quickly, you stay in the private market longer. When more people stay in the private market, competition gets worse. And the market becomes faster, colder, and more selective. Now the unfair comparison that hits hard. A home is supposed to be the base layer of life, the stable ground under everything. But in a tight French market, housing becomes a qualification. You do not just pay for shelter, you prove you deserve it. And that proof is expensive, not always in euros, in dignity. You can feel it in the way people talk. I need a guarantor. I do not have a CDI yet. My dossier is not strong enough. I cannot risk being labeled difficult. When those sentences become normal, the crisis is not just economic. It is psychological. So why does it feel like this? Not slogans, not blame, just repeating forces. First, demand concentrates where life concentrates. Jobs, universities, transport, services. People are pulled into the same cities and corridors. When too many people need the same streets, housing becomes a choke point. Second, scarcity turns selection into a filter. When landlords can choose from dozens of good applicants, they become extremely risk-averse. So renters start performing safety. They overprove, over-explain, over-comply, and people who should feel like adults start feeling like applicants. Third, the system becomes a set of parallel markets. If you have a strong dossier, you get options. If you don't, you get silence. And silence isn't neutral. Silence is exclusion. Fourth, supply can shrink for reasons that feel technical but hit like a punch. France has been tightening energy efficiency rules. From January 2025, homes rated G on the Energy Performance Diagnostic, DPE, are no longer allowed to be rented on new leases because they are considered indecent. On paper, it is about standards. In real life, it can mean fewer available rentals unless renovations happen fast enough. So renters feel the pressure from both sides, not enough homes and fewer homes that qualify. Now people ask the question they always ask: what is the government doing? Here is what exists on paper. France has rent control experiments, encadrement des loyers, in multiple high-pressure areas. It sets a reference rent and limits how high rent can be set above that reference in the covered zones. There is also a long-standing legal framework pushing municipalities to provide social housing. Under the SRU obligations, many municipalities are required to reach a minimum share of social housing, often 20% or 25%, depending on the area. And there is the idea written into French law that housing is not just a market issue. France has a recognized right to housing logic, DALO, where some households can seek enforcement when they are unable to access decent housing. So yes, rent caps exist. Social housing obligations exist. Rights frameworks exist. Standards exist. On paper, the system is moving. But renters do not live on paper. They live in outcomes. And the outcome renters recognize is this: the line at the viewing is still there. The dossier still decides your future. The silence still arrives after you apply. And waiting lists do not vanish because a law exists. They shrink only when enough doors actually open. So the emotional experience stays brutal. You keep living with a split reality. France can look stable and beautiful, while millions of renters feel like they are one rejection away from collapse. Because in a dossier-driven market, you do not feel like you belong. You feel like you are being assessed. And assessment changes people. You stop taking risks. You stop moving for better opportunities. You cling to whatever stability you have, even if it does not fit your life anymore. Because losing it can mean going back into the filter, back into the hallway, back into the silence, back into the dossier competition. And that is the quiet cruelty of France's housing crisis. A home becomes something you have to qualify for with paperwork and a guarantor, while time keeps moving without you. So here's the ending that should sit heavy. When a basic home depends on a perfect dossier, when stability depends on a guarantor you may not even have, what happens to the people who keep being rejected quietly without ever being seen? Subscribe to follow this series, country by country, because this isn't one place, it's a pattern.